They say a cow started the fire. A cow. In a barn, on a Sunday night. They say the animal kicked over a lantern, the lantern fell into the hay caught fire, the barn caught fire, the fence caught fire, the house caught fire, the neighborhood caught fire. And before anyone understood what had happened, Chicago was burning. It is a wonderful story, simple, memorable, almost perfect. It has an animal, it has an accident, it has one small mistake that grows into something enormous. People like disasters that begin with one mistake. One mistake can be blamed. One mistake can be understood. One mistake makes the world feel orderly. But nobody ever proved that Catherine O'Wallery's cow kicked over a lantern. Nobody proved that Catherine O'Wallery started the fire. The official investigation could not establish what ignited the barn behind the O'Wallery home on Deacoven Street that night. The cow survived. The story survived even longer. What we know is simpler. A fire began. Chicago was ready for it. That is the part people forget. The cow was never the real story. The city was. Chicago did not need a cow to burn. It needed a spark, any spark. Because by October of 1871, Chicago had spent years building one of the largest piles of dry fuel in America and calling it a city. Wooden houses, wooden shops, wooden barns, wooden warehouses, wooden fences, wooden sidewalks, wooden bridges. Lumber stacked in yards beside factories built from lumber, beside homes built from lumber, beside streets lined with lumber. The city had grown so quickly that permanence had become an inconvenience. Wood was cheap. Wood was available. Wood was fast. Chicago loved fast. 30 years earlier, much of the place had been mud, marsh, and prairie. Now nearly 300,000 people lived there. Railroads entered from every direction. Grain moved through enormous elevators. Cattle arrived by the thousands. Factories multiplied. Warehouses multiplied. Houses multiplied. Money multiplied. Chicago was becoming the city that would not wait. And anything that would not wait eventually discovers what waiting was protecting it from. That summer had been dry. Weeks passed with little rain. Lawns turned brown. Dust rose from the roads. Timber seasoned beneath the sun. Roofs dried. Fences dried. Sidewalks dried. The city became lighter, sharper, more brittle. A man could drop a match and watch flame move faster than his hand could reach it. Small fires happened constantly. People barely remembered them. A kitchen burned, a barn burned, a warehouse burned. Fire companies arrived, hoses uncoiled, pumps worked. The flames went down, everyone went home. Another fire, another bell, another ordinary emergency, until emergencies became routine. And routine is dangerous because routine teaches you what to expect. My father expected fire. His name was Michael Brennan. I was 16 years old when Chicago burned, and before that night I believed my father understood fire better than fire understood itself. He was a firefighter, not a hero. He would have hated that word. Heroes belong to statues. My father belonged to an engine house. He smelled of leather, horse sweat, wet wool, and smoke, always smoke, even after bathing, even after a week without a large fire. Smoke lived in his coat. Smoke lived beneath his fingernails. Smoke seemed to come from the seams of his boots. My mother sometimes hung his coat outside overnight. It never helped. The smell always came back, or perhaps it never left. I remember his hands more clearly than his face. That sounds strange, but faces change with expression. Hands reveal what a person does. My father's hands were thick through the palms and permanently marked. A white scar across one thumb where a rope had burned through the skin. A missing piece from one fingernail. Old blisters beneath new calluses. Tiny black marks that soap never completely removed. Those hands had carried me when I was small. They had repaired our roof. They had held reins, axes, ladders, hose lines. They had reached through smoke for people my father had never met. My mother wrapped those hands more nights than I can remember. Sometimes there were burns, usually small, red skin, a blister, a place where a glove had failed. She would sit across from him at the table with a bowl of cool water. He would put his hand into it. She would say nothing. He would say nothing. That was their marriage, not silence, understanding without needing the words. The Saturday before the Great Fire, another fire struck the city. People forget that one. History is cruel to rehearsals. It remembers the performance. Saturday night, October 7th, flames tore through part of the west side. Planing mills, lumberyards, factories. buildings packed close enough together that one burning wall could introduce itself to the next. The fire burned through the night and into Sunday. Fire crews fought it for hour after hour. My father came home sometime around midday. He opened the front door. My mother looked at him. I looked at him. Nobody asked how bad it had been. We could see. His face was gray. His coat was black at one shoulder. His eyes looked too small. He sat in the chair near the window. He did not remove his boots. That frightened me. My mother hated boots in the house. My father knew that. He would remove them even when he could barely stand. That day he simply sat. My mother put bread beside him. He did not touch it. She brought water. He drank half a cup and left the rest. "Michael," she said. His eyes remained closed. "Go upstairs. I'm only resting. You need sleep." "I am sleeping." "You are talking to me." "Then I'm not doing it very well." Normally my mother would have smiled. She did not. I watched his hands. They rested open on his thighs. One was wrapped in cloth. I could see a little blood through the fabric. "What happened?" I asked. He opened one eye. "Chicago happened." That was the first time I heard him say it that way, not a fire. Chicago. Later I understood what he meant. The firemen had been fighting more than flames. They had been fighting the city itself. Narrow streets, timber buildings, lumberyards, wind, bad water access, damaged equipment, too few men. Too many fires. The Saturday fire finally went down. The city inhaled. The firefighters tried to sleep. The equipment needed repair. The horses needed rest. The men needed more. They received less than a day. Sunday evening arrived warm and dry. I remember that because my mother opened the kitchen window. A little wind came through. Southwest. Steady. Not strong enough to frighten anyone. Strong enough to move a flame. My brother Patrick was 12. He sat at the table trying to repair the wooden wheel on a toy wagon. My sister Maggie was 7 and asleep upstairs. I was sewing. My mother was peeling potatoes. My father was still in the chair. His boots were still on. The city outside behaved normally. Wagons, voices, a dog barking. Somewhere a piano. Chicago had no idea that it was living through its final ordinary hour. Then the bell rang. My father's eyes opened before I moved. That is what I remember most. The speed. 1 second he looked almost dead from exhaustion. The next he was standing. The body knew the bell. The body had answered it hundreds of times. My mother turned from the stove. "Michael!" He pulled on his coat. She said his name again. This time he looked at her. There are looks that exist only between people who have been married a long time. A whole conversation passes and no one else hears it. My mother was saying, "You cannot go." My father was saying, "I have to." My mother was saying, "You have nothing left." My father was saying, "It does not matter." Finally she spoke. "You were out all night. So were the others. You can barely stand." "I'm standing." "Michael." He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. Then he looked at Patrick, at me, toward the stairs where Maggie slept. "I'll be back." He always said that. I had heard those words so many times that they had stopped meaning anything. That is the cruelty of ordinary promises. You only discover which one mattered after it has already been spoken. He opened the door. The wind entered. Then he was gone. My mother stood still for several seconds. Then she went back to the potatoes. She picked up the knife. Peel, turn, I watched her hands. "Is it close?" I asked. "No, how do you know?" "I don't." She kept peeling. 10 minutes passed, maybe 20. Then I smelled it, smoke, not my father's coat. Outside, I walked to the front door. My mother said, "Ada." I opened it anyway. People were standing in the street, looking south. I stepped onto the wooden sidewalk. The evening sky was no longer dark. Orange light had appeared low above the rooftops. Not much, a glow. The kind Chicago had seen 100 times, a warehouse fire, a barn, a block, something men like my father would handle. Then the wind moved. The glow brightened. A column of sparks lifted above the buildings, higher than any sparks I had ever seen. People stopped talking. The orange expanded. My mother came to the doorway behind me. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, "This one is different." I turned. "How do you know?" She did not answer immediately. She had spent 20 years waiting for my father to return from fires. She knew how far away a small fire looked. She knew how the sky changed when a fire grew. She knew what ordinary danger looked like. And whatever she saw that night was not ordinary. "The sky is too bright," she said. The wind pushed smoke across the rooftops. Somewhere to the south, another bell began ringing. Then another, then another. Soon there were bells from several directions. My mother stepped past me onto the sidewalk. Neighbors had come outside. Everyone looked toward the same orange horizon. Nobody knew the story about the cow yet. Nobody knew the name Great Chicago Fire. Nobody knew how many buildings would disappear. Nobody knew how many people would sleep without homes. We knew only that something was burning, and that my father had gone toward it. I watched the southern sky. A spark rose, then another, then 100. The wind caught them and carried them toward the city. At first, we stayed home. That is what people do when danger has not yet reached the door. They wait. Waiting allows you to pretend that somebody else is solving the problem. The firefighters are there. The police are there. The pumps are working. The river is there. The fire is somewhere else. Waiting is faith in distance. For another hour, distance protected us. Then the wind changed the meaning of distance. The orange horizon grew. Smoke began moving over the street. People came from the south carrying things, not many at first. A man with 2 suitcases. A woman holding a framed photograph against her chest. A boy pulling a small cart loaded with blankets. They moved north quickly. Then more came. Families, wagons, horses. People walking beside carts stacked with chairs, clocks, trunks, bedding, dishes. Whatever human beings decide is important when someone tells them they have 5 minutes to choose their life. I watched a man pushing a piano. A piano. He and another man had put it on a wagon with 1 broken wheel. They were trying to save a piano from a city made of fire. I remember thinking how foolish that was. Hours later, I would understand them completely. When a world is ending, the mind chooses objects because objects are smaller than grief. My mother stopped waiting. "Patrick," he looked up. "Get Maggie." He did not ask why. "Bring blankets, too, nothing else." Patrick ran upstairs. My mother looked at me. "Shoes." "I'm wearing shoes." "Good ones." "What?" "Put on your strongest shoes." That was the order that frightened me. Not run, not pack, shoes. My mother believed we might have to walk far. I changed them. By the time Patrick came down carrying a half-awake Maggie, the street was louder. A wagon overturned at the corner. Someone shouted that the fire had reached a lumberyard. Someone else shouted that the river would stop it. That became the rumor. The river will stop it. Water and fire. Simple. Opposites. A line the flame could not cross. People repeated it because they needed a wall. Chicago had built too few stone walls, so we built one in our minds. The river will stop it. My mother closed the shutters. She filled a bucket, then another. She wet the roof around the chimney. Our neighbor, Mr. Callahan, climbed onto his roof with a blanket soaked in water. People began doing the same all along the street. The danger was not only the main fire. The danger was what flew ahead of it. Burning shingles, pieces of timber, hot fragments lifted high by the wind. Fire does not need to walk from one building to another. It can travel through the air. I saw the first brand land near us. A piece of burning wood no larger than my forearm. It fell in the street trailing sparks. A man stamped it out. Everyone laughed, nervously. Then another landed on a roof. No one laughed. 2 men climbed after it. The southern sky was becoming brighter. Not white. Not because the air itself was burning. That was how it looked to me then, but what I was seeing was an enormous concentration of heat and flame, so intense that darkness seemed to have been pushed away. The fire was creating its own winds now. Hot air rising, cooler air rushing inward, embers lifting, falling, starting separate fires ahead of the main front. It looked alive. I need to be careful with that word. Fire does not think. It does not choose. It does not hate. Physics does not need hatred. That is what makes it frightening. A thing can destroy you without ever knowing you existed. The city had built paths for it. Wooden roofs, wooden yards, wooden fences, wooden sidewalks. The fire followed them. Not intelligently, perfectly. Sometime before midnight, word came running up the street. It crossed. Nobody needed to ask what. "The river," people repeated it. The fire crossed the river. The wall in our minds disappeared. Burning material had been carried across water. New fires had started beyond it. More roofs. More warehouses, more fuel. The river had never promised us anything. We had made the promise ourselves. My mother looked south, then west, then toward the lake. "Wake Maggie completely." "She is awake." "I'm awake," Maggie said. She was crying. "No crying yet," my mother told her. Maggie stared at her. "There may be time for that later." It was the most Ada Brennan sentence ever spoken. Practical even about terror. We carried only what we could hold. 2 blankets, water, a small bag of food, my mother's purse. Nothing more. I looked around the house, the table, my father's chair. The clock, my mother's wedding photograph, a blue bowl that had belonged to my grandmother, my bed upstairs, books, clothes, the spoon my mother used every morning. All of it remained. I asked, "What about Papa?" My mother did not look at me. "He knows where we live. But if we leave, he knows where we will go." "Where?" "The lake." That was the first time she said it. The lake. Lake Michigan sat east of Chicago like another world. Cold, dark, too large to understand. The fire could cross a river. It could not burn a lake. We joined the crowd. The street had become a moving body. Thousands of separate decisions pressed into one direction. North, east, away. There were horses without riders. Children tied to wagons with rope so they would not be separated. Men carrying mattresses over their heads to protect themselves from falling sparks. Women pushing baby carriages filled with household goods while carrying the babies themselves. Rich people beside laborers. Merchants beside servants. Immigrants beside men who had spent years blaming immigrants for every problem Chicago possessed. Fire is a brutal form of equality. It does not care what language you pray in. It does not ask how much money is in your pocket. It asks what your house is made of. Ours was wood, so was almost everyone else's. The heat found us before the flames did. At first it touched the back of my neck, then my ears, then the exposed skin of my hands. I looked behind. The sky seemed larger than the city, orange cloud, black smoke, sparks moving through it like stars falling in the wrong direction. People shouted, "Move! Keep going! Don't stop!" Maggie tried to walk. She lasted 3 blocks, then the crowd became too fast. People bumped her. A man nearly knocked her down. I picked her up. She wrapped both arms around my neck. At 7 years old, she was not heavy under ordinary circumstances. Nothing is ordinary while running from fire. Fear makes a child heavier. Responsibility makes her heavier still. The weight was not in my arms. It was in the knowledge that dropping her was impossible. Patrick stayed beside my mother. We moved. The sound changed. Behind us, buildings were collapsing. I had heard houses creak. I had heard lumber fall. I had never heard an entire structure surrender. There is a sequence: cracking, a deeper groan, a sudden roar, then an impact that you feel through your shoes. Somewhere, glass broke in quantities too large to sound like glass. It sounded like rain made of metal. Then bells, fire bells, church bells, alarm bells, so many that they stopped being information. A bell is useful only when danger has a location. Chicago no longer had a location for danger. Danger was everywhere. The fire companies were moving through streets already threatened by flame. Horses were exhausted. Men were exhausted. Equipment damaged from the previous night's fire was now being forced back into service. Then the water system itself became vulnerable. Once the pumping works failed, the city lost one of the few tools capable of fighting the fire at scale. Hoses became useless in places where pressure disappeared. Imagine being a firefighter. Standing in front of a wall of flame, holding a hose, opening the line, and receiving nothing. My father was somewhere inside that. I did not know where. That ignorance became another fire, one burning behind my ribs. We reached a bridge. People packed across it shoulder to shoulder. The bridge itself was wood. I stared at the boards under my feet. For the first time in my life, I hated wood. Every plank looked like a fuse. A horse slipped ahead of us. The wagon behind it turned sideways. People screamed. For several seconds, the crowd stopped. The heat did not. "Move!" someone shouted. Nobody could. Maggie buried her face in my shoulder. A woman beside us carried a bird cage. Inside was a small yellow canary. The bird jumped from perch to perch, terrified. The woman looked at the crowd, at the wagon, at the approaching smoke. Then she opened the cage. The bird did not leave. She shook it. "Go!" The canary clung to the perch. She reached inside, took the bird gently in one hand and threw it upward. For 1 second it vanished against the smoke. Then I saw yellow wings. It flew east, toward the lake. I watched until I lost it. The wagon moved. The crowd surged. We crossed. On the other side, safety failed again. Another fire had started ahead. That is one of the things people misunderstood afterward. There was not always one clean line of flame moving north. Burning brands created separate fires. Those fires grew. They joined. A family could escape one front only to discover another burning farther ahead. We turned east, toward water. Lincoln Park and the open prairie would save many. Others pushed toward the lakefront. We went to the lake. The shoreline was already crowded. Families stood among trunks, furniture, bedding, and bundles. Some had saved almost everything they could carry. Others had nothing. Smoke moved low across the sand. Brands fell around us. People backed closer to the water. Then closer. A burning fragment landed in a pile of blankets. Men threw the pile into the lake. The water swallowed the flame. Everyone saw, everyone understood. Cold was now safety. My mother stepped into Lake Michigan first. Her dress darkened immediately. She inhaled sharply. October water. She turned. Come. Patrick entered. I carried Maggie. The first touch of water against my boots felt like ice. Then my knees, then my thighs. I expected relief from the fire. Instead, my body received two forms of pain at once. Heat against my face, cold around my legs. We did not go deep. We stayed near the shore where we could stand. Around us, other people did the same. Some remained on the sand. Some crowded piers. Some moved farther into shallow water when the heat intensified. Thousands more were escaping toward open ground elsewhere in the city. We were only one small group among an entire population in motion. But standing there, I believed everyone in Chicago had come to the lake. The burning city filled our entire horizon. Maggie trembled against me. Is Papa coming? Yes, I said. My mother looked at me. She knew I had no right to promise. I said it anyway. Children require promises before they require truth. Papa is coming. Hours passed. We watched Chicago burn. Not all of Chicago, I know that now. Large parts of the south and west sides survived. But from where I stood, wet and shaking in the lake, the difference did not matter. The center of our world was disappearing. Flames moved through streets I knew. Smoke hid buildings. Then the smoke cleared and those buildings were no longer there. The courthouse, shops, hotels, homes, churches, places people believed were permanent. Nothing looks more permanent than a building before the moment it falls. I held Maggie. My mother held Patrick close. The wind moved sparks over our heads. Somewhere behind that orange wall, my father was fighting, or running, or injured, or dead. I could not know. That became the longest night of my life. Not because the fire burned, because every minute contained the possibility that my father would never walk through a doorway again. Near dawn, the wind began to change. The worst heat moved farther north. The sky remained red. The city continued burning. But for the first time in hours, the lakefront felt like refuge instead of a temporary delay. Maggie had fallen asleep against me. Her wet hair stuck to my cheek. I looked toward the city and waited for a man who had promised, "I'll be back." Morning came. He did not. Dawn did not end the fire. That is another thing stories simplify. Night becomes morning. Therefore, danger must become aftermath. It did not. Chicago continued burning through Monday. Fires remained active. Buildings collapsed. People kept moving. Smoke covered enormous sections of the city. Rain would eventually help. So would exhaustion, not human exhaustion, the fires. A fire can only consume what exists. Eventually, Chicago began running out of things for it to eat, but when daylight arrived, we could finally see what darkness had hidden. The damage was worse in daylight. Night allows imagination. Day provides evidence. From the lakefront, we saw smoke rising from places where neighborhoods had been. Chimneys stood without houses. Walls remained without rooms. Iron bent. Stone cracked. Bricks lay in piles. The city had not vanished. Large sections survived. But the heart of Chicago looked as though someone had taken an enormous hand and wiped across the map. My mother waited until movement inland became possible. Then she said, "We find your father." Nothing else, not our house, not food, not shelter, my father. We left the water. My legs almost failed when I tried to walk. After hours in cold water and wet clothes, my muscles belonged to someone else. Patrick was limping. Maggie slept against my shoulder until I could no longer carry her. Then my mother took her. We walked. The ash surprised me. I expected black. Much of it was gray, soft in places, thick, warm. The ground itself held heat. Smoke emerged from cracks and cellar holes. At one intersection, the remains of a building still glowed beneath collapsed timbers. Men shouted for us to stay away. We changed streets. Chicago had become a maze without walls. Familiar corners no longer existed. Signs were gone. Stores were gone. Landmarks were gone. We navigated by surviving chimneys and the direction of the lake. Silence existed between the noises. That sounds impossible. But disaster has a strange silence. You hear shouting, wheels, coughing, occasional collapse. Yet the continuous sound of ordinary life is gone. No shopkeepers calling customers. No children playing. No factory rhythm. No wagon traffic moving for business. Everything has one purpose: survive, search, carry, help. The ordinary city was silent. We went first toward the engine house where my father had worked, or where we believed it had been. I say that because the street no longer looked like itself. A portion of the structure remained. Brick foundation, iron pieces, a section of wall. The engine was gone. A firefighter sat near the ruins with a bandage around his head. My mother ran to him. "Michael Brennan," he stared at her. "What company?" she told him. He shook his head. "Men scattered during the night." "Where?" "Everywhere." "Was he hurt?" "I don't know." "Did you see him?" "I don't know." My mother grabbed his coat, not violently, desperately. "You know him, Michael Brennan?" The man closed his eyes, then opened them. "Tall?" "Yes." "Dark hair?" "Yes." "Scar here?" He touched his own thumb. My mother's face changed. "Yes. I saw him near the river." "When?" "Hours ago." "Alive?" "Yes." One word, alive. That word gave my body back its strength. We followed whatever information we could collect. A firefighter near the river. A crew forced north. Men helping refugees. A hose team cut off. A company separated. Nobody knew where anyone was. The fire had broken the department into pieces just as it had broken the city. We searched. Hours. I began looking at hands. Every firefighter had the same coat, the same soot, the same exhaustion, so I looked at hands. Hands holding cups. Hands wrapped in cloth. Hands resting on knees. Hands black with smoke. I knew my father's hands. I would recognize them anywhere. Near the lake, farther north than where we had spent the night, we found a group of men sitting on the sand. Some were firefighters, some were civilians. One man sat apart, coat around his shoulders, head lowered. Hands between his knees. I stopped. I recognized the left hand first, the scar across the thumb. "Papa," he looked up. There are moments when a person changes age instantly. My father had left our house looking 45. He looked 60 when he raised his face. I ran. He tried to stand. He could not, so I fell to my knees in front of him. His arms came around me slowly, not because he did not want to hold me, because his hands were burned. Badly. The gloves had protected some places. Not others. Skin across several knuckles was raw. One palm had been wrapped in torn cloth. The burns were not the small kind my mother treated at the kitchen table. These would not disappear overnight. My mother reached him. She did not cry. She touched his face, then his shoulders, then both hands without actually touching them, as though counting, as though confirming every part remained. "The children?" he asked. "Here." He looked at Patrick, Maggie, me. His eyes closed. For the first time, I saw my father cry, only once. A little water through soot, then gone. "What happened?" I asked. He looked back toward the smoke. Did you fight all night?" "Yes." "Did the water stop?" "In places." "Did the river stop it?" He almost laughed. "No." "Did you save people?" His face tightened. That question hurt him more than his hands. "I don't know." "You must know." "I don't." "How can you not know?" "Because there was too much." He stared at his bandages. We pulled people from one building and watched the next one catch. We moved a hose and lost pressure. We opened a door and found the stairs gone. We pushed wagons out of streets so families could pass. We cut horses loose. We carried people until we couldn't carry them. He looked at me. There wasn't a moment when you could stand back and say, "There, I saved that." Everything kept moving. "You fought." "Yes." "And you lost?" He was quiet. Then, the city lost buildings. He looked at Patrick and Maggie. We didn't lose everyone. That was the difference between my father and the stories people later told. Stories like clean victories. Firefighter wins, fire loses. City survives, or fire wins. City dies, reality is messier. A man can lose a building and save a child. Lose a street and save a family. Lose the fire and still make the fighting matter. We sat with him until he could walk. Then we went home. Home. A strange word when you do not know whether the place exists. Fricker Street was damaged beyond recognition. Our house was gone, not damaged, not partially standing. Gone. One thing remained, the chimney. Brick, blackened, alone. It rose from the foundation like a monument to every room that no longer existed. The kitchen was ash. My parents' bedroom was ash. My bed was ash. The chair where my father had rested was ash. The doorway where I had watched him leave was somewhere beneath the ash. My mother walked into the foundation. She moved carefully. Smoke still rose from one corner. Patrick said, "Mama," she ignored him. She bent, picked up something. A spoon, silver, black. bent slightly at the handle, but still a spoon. She rubbed it against her dress. Soot came away, not all enough. My father looked at it. My mother turned the spoon in her hand, then said, "We will need this." That sentence stayed with me longer than the fire. We will need this. Not everything is gone. Not why us. Not how could this happen. We will need this. A spoon, a ridiculous object against a destroyed city. And yet that is how rebuilding begins, not with a skyline, with the first thing you decide not to throw away. In the days that followed, numbers arrived. Numbers always come after disaster. Numbers are what officials used to place borders around something that felt borderless to the people inside it. More than 17,000 buildings destroyed. Roughly 3.5 square miles burned. About 100,000 people without homes. At least hundreds dead, the accepted figure eventually settling around 300. Nearly a third of Chicago's population displaced. Those numbers were real. They were also useless to me. 100,000 homeless people did not hurt more than one missing house. 17,000 buildings did not hurt more than one chimney. 300 dead did not make sense. One dead person would. A number becomes grief only after someone gives it a name. We were fortunate. All 5 Brennans were alive. That fact made us rich in a city where money had burned. The relief effort began almost immediately. Food arrived. Blankets, clothing, canvas. Donations from cities we had never seen. People opened churches. Schools, homes, tents appeared. Families slept in parks and on open ground. Some left Chicago entirely. Others returned to the ruins before the embers were cold. My mother returned. The next morning, my father could barely close his right hand. He told her to wait. She said, "For what?" "The ground is still hot." "So wear thicker shoes." He followed her. That was my parents. My mother began clearing ash from the foundation. One pan at a time. Patrick helped. I helped. Neighbors helped each other. Nobody had enough tools, so tools moved from house to house. A shovel became community property. An axe belonged to whoever needed it. A hammer traveled farther than most people. People who had competed for business 1 week earlier shared boards the next, not because disaster makes everyone good. It doesn't. There was theft, exploitation, people charging obscene prices to move possessions. Arguments over relief, fear, rumors, prejudice. Chicago did not become a saint because Chicago burned. It remained human. Human beings can be generous and selfish in the same hour. What mattered was that enough hands kept working. My mother uncovered our iron stove. Damaged, blackened, still usable. She stared at it, then at my father. "You're not doing this." "Doing what?" "I know that face." "What face?" "The face that says no." I wasn't going to say no. "You were breathing like you were going to say no." My father sighed. "What are you planning?" She cleaned the stove, set it upright, built a small fire inside. My father stared. A fire in the ruins of our burned house. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then my mother put a pot on top. She made coffee. That was Ada Brennan's answer to the Great Chicago Fire. Not a speech. Coffee. Contained flame. Useful flame. Fire beneath iron. Fire doing what we asked. The same element that had destroyed our home now heated water over its foundation. My father sat beside the chimney holding the cup with both bandaged hands. I thought he might hate the flame. He did not. He watched it, then said, "That's the size fire ought to be." My mother answered, "Then we'll keep it that size." We laughed. It felt almost wrong. The city was still smoking. People were dead. Thousands had nowhere to sleep. And we laughed. That is another thing history forgets. People laugh after disasters, not because grief is finished, because the body cannot carry grief every second. Sometimes laughter is the hand that lets you put it down, just long enough to breathe. That night we slept beneath canvas beside the old chimney. Wind moved through the tent, the ground smelled of ash. My father's hands throbbed beneath bandages. My mother placed the blackened spoon beside the stove. I looked at it before sleeping. 1 spoon, 1 stove, 1 chimney, 5 people. Chicago had been reduced to inventories, and inventories are where rebuilding begins. Chicago began rebuilding almost immediately. That sentence sounds heroic. It was also desperate. A person without a roof does not rebuild because he wants to make history. He rebuilds because winter is coming. The first buildings were not monuments. They were shelter. Temporary stores, wooden shacks, tents. Cheap structures thrown together because people needed somewhere to sleep, sell, cook, work. This is where the simple version of Chicago's rebirth becomes wrong. People later liked to say, the city burned because it was wood. So Chicago rebuilt in brick and stone. Clean lesson, clean transformation. Reality resisted cleanliness. Brick cost money, stone cost money, fire-resistant construction cost money, and many of the people who had lost everything had the least money they had ever possessed. The city argued. Officials wanted stricter fire limits. Businessmen wanted safer construction. Insurance companies wanted buildings that would not disappear in one night. Working families wanted houses they could afford. You cannot tell a man living beneath canvas that his new home must be made from expensive materials and expect him to thank you for the wisdom. So rebuilding happened unevenly. Brick here, stone there, wood again in places where necessity defeated regulation. New rules expanded over time. Another major fire a few years later would push them farther. Chicago did not learn one lesson once. Cities are slower than that. They learn through repetition. Pain, argument, money, resistance, and occasionally law. Our house returned modestly. The chimney remained. My father refused to remove it. Still straight, he said. My mother said, it looks terrible. Still straight. It's black. Still straight. So the chimney stayed, the old surviving inside the new. My father's hands healed slowly. For weeks he could not grip an axe. Then he could. Not strongly, then stronger. Every few days he tested himself. Hammer, saw, rope. He treated recovery like a fire, approach, work, retreat, return. Eventually his hands closed around tools again. He helped rebuild our house. Then the neighbors, then another. He was still a firefighter. But after the Great Fire, fighting and building began to look like versions of the same act. Both resisted destruction, one before, one after. My mother ran our reconstruction as if commanding an army. Boards there, brick there, do not waste nails, do not leave tools in rain. Patrick, hold this. Ada, carry that. Michael, stop trying to lift things your hands cannot lift. I can lift it. You dropped a cup this morning. That cup was slippery. The cup was sitting on a table. I had just touched it. Michael. Yes, Catherine. The blackened spoon returned to the kitchen before we had a complete kitchen. My mother cleaned it until most of the soot disappeared. A dark stain remained near the bowl. She kept it. For years, she refused to polish that section away. I once asked why, so I know which one it is. You only have 6 spoons. I know. Then you would know anyway. She looked at me. That isn't what I mean. I understood later. Objects do not remember. We remember through them. The stain was not dirt. It was evidence. Proof that fire had taken the house and failed to take everything. Chicago became full of such evidence. Old walls beside new walls. Foundations reused. Bent iron recovered. Bricks cleaned and laid again. Businesses reopened beneath temporary roofs. Signs appeared before doors. A merchant might lose his building on Monday and be selling from a table on Thursday. People wrote addresses on boards and planted them in ash. Here, open. Business RESUMED. Language itself became architecture. A sign could create a store before walls existed. Aid arrived from across the country and beyond. Food, money. Clothing, tools, books, medical supplies. Chicago had spent decades shouting to the world that it could take care of itself. Then the world fed Chicago. That humbled some people, not everyone. Chicago has never been talented at humility, but it remembered the help. The city rebuilt fast. Too fast, some said. Exactly as before, speed, ambition, opportunity. Land changed hands, fortunes were made. Some people who had lost everything never fully recovered. Others used the cleared ground to build more than they had owned before. The fire did not distribute suffering fairly. It did not distribute opportunity fairly either. That mattered. I noticed because I grew older. At 16, rebuilding meant our house. At 20, I understood that rebuilding was also politics. Who receives loans? Who receives materials? Whose district gets new infrastructure? Whose business returns? Whose rent rises? Who is allowed to rebuild cheaply? Who is told safety requires a price they cannot pay? The new Chicago was not simply stronger, it was contested. Every brick contained an argument about what the city should become. Patrick became obsessed with buildings. Before the fire, he had loved toy wagons. After the fire, he drew houses, not pretty houses, structures, walls, supports, roofs. He drew fire moving through them. He drew gaps between buildings. He drew staircases. He drew brick. Why no curtains? Maggie once asked him. Curtains burn, so do chairs. I'm not designing chairs. You should, these houses are ugly. Patrick ignored her. Eventually, he apprenticed with builders and draftsmen. Years later, he worked around architects who were beginning to think differently about cities. Chicago was changing. Fire-resistant construction mattered more. Commercial buildings became larger. Engineering improved. Iron, then steel. New structural possibilities appeared. The Great Fire did not invent the skyscraper by itself. That would be another cow story, a simple cause for a complicated transformation. Economics mattered. Land values mattered. Elevators mattered. Steel framing mattered. Engineering mattered. Population mattered. Business mattered. But the fire cleared enormous sections of the commercial city and forced Chicago to ask what kind of buildings should replace what had been lost. That question did not disappear. By 1885, when the home insurance building rose in Chicago with its innovative metal frame construction, people would later point to it as one of the beginnings of the modern skyscraper. I stood downtown the first time. Patrick took me to see the new buildings. I looked upward until my neck hurt. Chicago had once spread outward in wood. Now parts of it were beginning to climb. "You like it?" Patrick asked. "I don't trust anything that tall." "Why? Because it is farther to fall," he laughed. "That is not how architecture works. I watched Chicago burn. I'm allowed to distrust buildings." He touched one of the columns. "This is the point." "What?" "To build things you can trust more." I thought about that more, not completely. That is an important word. Nothing is fireproof forever. Nothing is permanent. Stone cracks, iron bends, steel weakens under enough heat, cities flood, buildings fall, people die. The lesson of Chicago was never, build something disaster cannot destroy. No such thing exists. The lesson was, do not make disasters work easy. Give yourself time, give people exits. Give fire fewer paths, build with memory. That was what Patrick meant, build with memory. My father returned to the fire department. My mother begged him not to, once, only once. "I could ask you to stop," she said. He looked at his hands. "Yes." "I could say we almost lost you." "Yes." "I could say you have children." "Yes." "I could say you've done enough." He waited, she sighed, "And none of it would matter." He looked at her. "It would matter. But you would still go." "Yes," she nodded. "Then come back." "I will," the old promise. The gamble resumed. He fought fires for years after 1871. Smaller ones, warehouse fires, house fires, factory fires. The ordinary emergencies returned. That is another strange thing about surviving catastrophe. Eventually, the alarm bell becomes just an alarm bell again. The smell of smoke becomes smoke. Rain falls, winter comes, children grow, bread burns in ovens, people complain about taxes, someone builds a bad fence, someone paints a shop, someone gets married. The world commits the almost insulting act of continuing. Chicago continued. Within a few years, visitors could stand in places that had been ash and struggle to imagine the destruction. Buildings covered the scars. Streets filled. Business returned. Noise returned. That noise mattered to me. The first months after the fire, silence had terrified me. Years later, I loved the hammering. Construction. Wagons, trains, factories, people shouting prices. The city rebuilding itself so loudly that memory had to compete. Sometimes I walked to the river and remembered the night everyone said, "The river will stop it." The river had failed as a wall, so had many buildings, so had many assumptions. But failure teaches better than confidence. Before the fire, Chicago believed growth itself was proof of intelligence. Afterward, at least some people understood that survival requires something more than growth. It requires maintenance, rules, materials, preparedness. People willing to ask uncomfortable questions while everything is still going well. What happens when it burns? What happens when the pump fails? What happens when the wind turns? What happens when the bridge is blocked? What happens when the men fighting tonight's fire spent last night fighting another one? Those are not pessimistic questions. They are loving questions. You ask them because you want the city to survive. My father understood that. He began training younger firefighters differently, not with speeches. My father disliked speeches. He would point at a building. What is it made of? Brick. What is behind the brick? Wood joists. Roof, timber. Access, front and alley. Water. Hydrant on the corner. What happens if the corner is blocked? The young man would pause. My father would say, "That's the part you need to know." Not the visible danger. The second danger. The thing behind the thing. That was what Chicago had failed to see in 1871. People saw one barn fire, behind it, a dry summer, a wooden city, a strong wind, exhausted firefighters, damaged equipment, lumber, wooden streets, wooden bridges, weak systems. The cow was a story about a match. The fire was a story about everything waiting behind it. One evening years later, my father and I sat outside our rebuilt house. The old chimney rose through the new roof, still black in places, still straight. He rubbed one hand. The burns had healed, but scar tissue tightened in cold weather. Does it hurt? Only when the weather changes. It changes every day. Then I suppose it hurts every day. He smiled. I looked at his hands. The same hands, different skin. He had once told me Chicago happened to them. Now I understood. The city had written itself across my father's body, and my father's hands had written themselves back into the city. That was rebuilding, not replacing what was lost. Answering it, years passed. That sentence is unfair. Years do not pass, people pass through them. Chicago changed around us. Maggie grew tall. Patrick became a man who spent more time looking at roofs than faces. My mother grew gray without admitting it. My father's coat continued smelling of smoke. I married, had children, moved 3 streets away because my mother considered anything farther an act of betrayal. The city rose, brick, stone, iron, steel. New buildings replaced new buildings. The skyline changed so often that every generation believed it was seeing the permanent Chicago. Every generation was wrong. That is what cities are. Temporary things pretending to be permanent. My father eventually retired from the fire department. Not because he wanted to. His hands made the decision. Scar tissue, stiffness, an old injury in one shoulder, a knee that hurt on ladders. The body keeps a better record than any city archive. Every fire remained somewhere inside him. The final day, he brought his coat home. My mother stared at it hanging near the door. You know that is not staying there. I've hung it there for 30 years. You smelled bad for 30 years. You married me? Before I understood the full extent of the problem, he laughed. He moved the coat. He sat in his chair, a newer chair, same corner, near the window. His hands rested in his lap. The first time I saw him sitting like that after retirement, I remembered Sunday, October 8th. Boots still on, eyes closed. 24 hours after the Saturday fire, the bell about to ring, except now there was no bell for him. When one rang elsewhere in the city, his body still reacted. Head lifting, shoulders tightening, hands moving slightly, then remembering, not yours anymore. That must be one of the hardest things about leaving a profession that becomes an identity. The city continues needing firefighters. It simply stops needing you. My father struggled with that. He never said so. I knew because he began walking past the engine house. Too often. Going somewhere? I asked once. No, you're carrying bread. Your mother asked me to buy it. The bakery is the other direction. He looked down at the bread. Long way home? Very long, he smiled. The men at the engine house always invited him inside. He rarely entered. A former firefighter does not want to become furniture in a working firehouse. So he stood outside, asked questions, listened, then went home. One evening, years after the fire, I sat beside him. There was a small flame in the stove. My mother's controlled fire, the good fire. That phrase had remained in our family. Whenever Maggie cooked, good fire. Whenever Patrick lit a fireplace, good fire. Whenever my children leaned too close, respect the good fire. The great fire had not made us afraid of flame. It had made us specific about it. My father watched the stove. I told him about the canary. I had never told him the entire story. The woman, the cage, the bridge, the bird refusing to leave until she threw it into the air. The yellow wings disappearing toward the lake. He listened. Then smiled. That bird had more sense than we did. It flew toward safety. Exactly. I always thought it looked brave. No, brave would be flying toward the fire. That would be stupid. He looked at me. Firefighters. I laughed. He laughed too. Then he winced because laughing had begun to hurt his ribs. That bird, he said, was smarter than a firefighter. For years, I had imagined the opposite. Maybe wisdom changes with age. When I was 16, courage meant running toward danger. When I was older, courage became knowing when to run away. Both can save a life. The night of October 8th required both kinds. My father ran toward the fire. My mother ran us away. Neither action was more courageous. Both brought our family to mourning. After my father died, my mother gave me the spoon. The blackened one. I held it. The stain remained. You kept this all these years? Of course. Why give it to me? You remember. So do you? I don't need an object anymore. I understood. Memory eventually moves inside the body. The object has done its job. I kept the spoon. I still have it. I am old now. Older than my father ever became in my memories. That is another strange thing. Parents stop aging in the mind. My father is always somewhere between 40 and 50, always standing in the doorway, always saying, "I'll be back," always sitting on the lakefront with burned hands, always touching the old chimney and saying, "Still straight." My mother is always holding the spoon. "We will need this." Patrick is always drawing buildings that do not burn. Maggie is always asleep against my shoulder. And Chicago is always two cities. The city before, the city after. People come now and ask about the Great Fire. They ask about the cow. Always the cow. Did the cow really kick the lantern? I tell them, I don't know, nobody knows. Then they are disappointed. People prefer myths with hooves. The truth is harder. The truth does not fit inside one barn. The fire began somewhere. Maybe a lantern, maybe something else. But an ignition is not the same as a disaster. A spark begins a flame. A city creates the conditions that decide what the flame becomes. That is what I want people to remember, not that Chicago was foolish. It was ambitious. Ambition is not foolish, but ambition without memory becomes dangerous. Chicago built quickly because people needed houses. Wood was cheap. Lumber was abundant. The city was growing faster than regulation, infrastructure, and firefighting capacity could comfortably follow. None of those facts alone caused the Great Fire. Together, they created vulnerability. Then came drought, wind, another large fire exhausting men and damaging equipment, then another flame. Conditions met opportunity, and Chicago burned, roughly 36 hours. More than 17,000 structures, a huge section of the city's core and north side, around 100,000 people without homes, hundreds dead. But even those numbers are not what I remember. I remember temperature. Cold lake water around my legs, heat on my face, Maggie's weight, my mother's voice, the sound of timber collapsing, ash beneath my shoes, my father's hands. The spoon, always the spoon. History likes the enormous. People remember the skyline of flames. I remember an object small enough to fit in one hand. That is how memory works. Civilizations become objects. Wars become photographs. Disasters become one thing found in the ruins. A ring, a cup, a shoe, a spoon, the city rebuilt. And yes, it rebuilt with greater attention to fire-resistant materials. Brick, stone, iron, later steel, rules changed, construction changed, engineering changed, architecture changed, not all at once, not perfectly, not because everyone suddenly became wise. Human beings do not become wise that efficiently. They argue their way toward improvement. Chicago argued, built, burned again in smaller fires, changed more, built more. Eventually, the city became famous not only for rebuilding but for inventing new ways to build. Tall buildings appeared, skeleton frames, elevators, offices stacked above offices. The ground had become too valuable to waste. So Chicago moved upward. People later called some of those buildings skyscrapers. Sometimes they say the Great Fire created the skyscraper. That is too simple. The fire did not draw the plans. It did not invent steel. It did not invent elevators. But catastrophe cleared land, changed regulations, altered investment, and forced questions about what the next Chicago should look like. The answers helped create the city that followed. That is enough. Fire does not need credit for everything. I walked downtown once with my father late in his life. We stood beneath one of the tall buildings. He leaned back, looked up, then said, "Terrible place for a ladder." I laughed so hard people turned. That was my father. An architect saw progress. A businessman saw offices. My father saw the problem of reaching the top floor with a hose. Different fire department now, I told him. Same fire. He was right. Technology changes. Materials change. Cities change. Fire remains fire. And people remain people. We build. We grow confident. We forget. Then something reminds us. The purpose of history is not to make us afraid. It is to shorten the distance between forgetting and remembering. That is why I tell this story, not because Chicago burned. Cities burn, London burned, Rome burned, San Francisco would burn, cities flood, cities fall. Cities are temporary. What matters is what people do after the thing they believed was permanent proves that it was not. My mother picked up a spoon. My father picked up a hammer when his hands could close again. Patrick picked up a pencil. I picked up Maggie. Other people picked up bricks, shovels, boards, children, neighbors, food, blankets. One person cannot rebuild a city, but cities are not rebuilt by cities. They are rebuilt by hands. Millions of individual movements. Lift, carry, clear, dig, lay, hammer, cook, write, open, begin. That is what survives disasters, not buildings. The instinct to build another one. My mother once told me Chicago did not mourn. She was wrong. Chicago mourned. It simply mourned while working. There is a difference. Grief does not require stillness. Sometimes grief carries bricks. Sometimes grief cooks food. Sometimes grief repairs a roof. Sometimes grief goes to work because children need breakfast. The fire was not the end, but neither was it a gift. I dislike when people say disasters are blessings because something good eventually follows. 300 dead people are not an architectural opportunity. 100,000 people without homes are not a lesson plan. Suffering does not become good because survivors build something beautiful afterward. The fire was terrible. The rebuilding was beautiful. Both can be true. One does not justify the other. That is another thing age taught me. We do not need tragedy in order to deserve transformation. But when tragedy comes, transformation is one way the living answer it. So remember Chicago. Not only the orange sky, not only Deakoven Street, not only Catherine O'Leary, and please, not only the cow. Remember the men who had fought a major fire the night before and went out again. Remember families moving through streets beneath falling brands. Remember people crowding the open ground and lakefront. Remember those who stepped into cold water because heat had made land dangerous. Remember the people who did not reach morning. Remember the ones who did. Remember my father. Not because Michael Brennan existed exactly as I have told him. He did not. I am a story. He is a story. We carry pieces of people who did exist. Firefighters, daughters, mothers, children, refugees, builders. The thousands whose names never became part of the cow story. Remember their hands. That is what I would ask. Hands, burned hands, cold hands, hands carrying children, hands dragging trunks, hands holding reins, hands passing buckets, hands clearing ash, hands laying brick, hands signing relief papers, hands drawing buildings, hands lifting Chicago back into the air. My father used to say a firefighter's job was not to defeat fire. I understand that now. You cannot defeat fire, you manage it, contain it, respect it, prepare for it. And when preparation fails, you stand between it and whoever is behind you for as long as you can. Cities work the same way. You cannot defeat disaster forever. You can build better, remember better, respond faster. Give the next generation more time than you had. That is civilization, not permanence, preparation. The blackened spoon sits beside me now. Sometimes the light catches the stain. It is still there, I could remove it, I never will. Because when I look at it, I do not see a ruined house. I see my mother standing in ash. I see her turn the spoon in her hand. I hear 4 words, we will need this. She was right. We needed the spoon. Not because there were no other spoons in Chicago. We needed what it meant. Something survived. Something could be used again. Something from before could enter after. That is rebuilding. The past does not disappear, it becomes material. Chicago was built once from wood, then fire taught it what wood could become. Chicago built again, not perfectly, not safely forever, not without repeating mistakes, but differently. The cow got the legend. The fire got the photographs. The architects got the skyline. The politicians got the speeches, but the city belonged to the hands. The hands had the final word. The fire does not. Fire only knows how to consume. It cannot decide what comes after. We decide that. The fire went out. The hands kept moving. Chicago rose. And somewhere beneath the stone, the brick, the iron, the steel, the streets, and the towers of the city that came afterward, there is still a layer of ash. The old city, the wooden city. The city that believed speed was enough. The city that learned otherwise. The city that burned, and then learned how to build with the memory of burning. My name is Ada Brennan. I was 16 years old when Chicago caught fire. I carried my sister toward the lake. I watched my father leave through a doorway. I found him again with burned hands. I watched my mother pull one blackened spoon from the ashes of our home, and I watched a city begin again before the ground had cooled. People ask what started the Great Chicago Fire. Maybe that is the wrong question. The better question is, what allowed one fire to become Chicago's fire? And after you answer that, ask one more. When everything you built becomes ash, what do you pick up first? My mother chose a spoon. Chicago chose a brick, and both of them began, remember us, not as the cow, not as the lantern, not only as the city that burned. Remember the hands, remember the cold water, remember the ash, remember the spoon. Remember the rebuilding. Chicago, the city that learned to burn, and then learned that burning did not have to be the end.